This video is to document the construction and production of my spring garden beds. I broke ground on these garden beds on March 2nd. During the time when I built these garden beds, I was working full-time, and so I was building these beds in my off time. It took roughly about 2 weeks to get the beds made and planted. The second bed that I finished was planted about a week later than the first bed. So my technique for building these beds was basically to dig a little trench and to lift that topsoil over and turn that into my raised bed. Then, as you can see from the video, we backfilled the trench with wood chips that had been dropped at my lot from a tree trimming company for free. As we were backfilling the trenches with wood chips, I worked on breaking down any large dirt clods to smooth out the garden bed. I also made sure any large clumps of grass were either flipped over or the roots were removed from the bed, but I didn't try and remove all of the grass by any means. My intention was to give the seeds we were planting a good head start, but I wasn't worried about removing all the competition from weeds. So here are a couple images of the seed mixes that I used. To plant our seeds, we would plant them between layers of compost. So for the larger seeds, they went on bottom and then were covered with a layer of compost. And then we did smaller seeds on top of that with another layer of compost. The larger seeds were more for summer production or warmer season production. And it was sort of an experiment to see if they would just naturally come up if I left these beds undisturbed. And as of recording this video, I can report that some of the summer seeds have come up, although I'm letting my spring crop go to seed, and so there's still time for them to kind of fade out and for the summer production to fade in. So it's an ongoing experiment, and I will report in a later video how that goes. But as you can see from this video, we are just spreading compost on top of some of the seeds that we're planting, making sure that no seeds are visible so the birds don't get them, and as well so they have a better chance of germinating. I definitely did lose quite a bit of seeds to birds, but that's okay because we planted plenty of seed. In general, my methodology and perspective on these garden beds was to stay unattached and to really just let nature take its course. And with that perspective, I am more than happy to share with the birds and other living things. I find that when you have a perspective of abundance and are willing to share, abundance tends to come your way. In the video now, we are planting some onion bulbs that I bought. I planted onions around the edge of both garden beds to create some biodiversity as well as to create a fragrant border that could help deter insects from devouring the more appetizing plants. I was also very grateful to have help planting these onions. One thing that I learned is not to wait till the soil dries in order to spread it out flat and break it down. This garden bed had been sitting for a week and the dirt had dried out and gotten pretty hard, and it was much harder to break it down than the first bed. I thought that if it had dried, it might be more crumbly and easier to break down, but that was not the case. So the way that I created these garden beds is pretty much along the lines of how I would create no-till garden beds. Now, I can't exactly say that I'm not tilling the ground in that, by digging the trenches and moving the dirt and breaking down the dirt, I'm definitely doing some tilling. But it's more that once the garden beds are made, there's no longer a requirement to disturb the soil. Each season, compost can just be added on top of the previous year's soil, and the fertility will continue to increase year by year. With these garden beds and with all of the projects I'm working on my lot, my intention is to get feedback from the environment and to interact and to learn. I am wanting for nature to guide my decisions and guide my interactions with it so that I can facilitate a sort of acceleration and a sort of thriving. I want to tap into the principles that are already existing in nature and just utilize them in a way that brings a production that I desire. So after the second garden bed was cleared of most of the showing grasses and weeds, it was ready to plant some seeds. I planted the seeds in the same way that I did for the first bed. So put in on the larger seeds and then covered them with a layer of compost, and then onto smaller seeds with another smaller layer of compost. I was collecting compost from the job that I was working at while I was making these garden beds, and this compost is composted horse manure, and I was getting it for free, and I was just loading up my truck and bringing it. So the compost in the second garden bed might have been a little different than the first bed. It's definitely more moist, which is the difference in color you can see. But beyond that, I can't remember if it was more composted or more fresh. But either way, there wasn't really a difference in production. So I think it was pretty much similar to the first bed. So here I'm just sprinkling some compost on top of the smaller seeds that I planted, just to make sure that no seeds are visible and they're all kind of camouflaged and hidden from the birds. So after we got both beds planted, Jordan and I got some potatoes and we planted them straight into the wood chips in our aisleways. My thinking with this was that this was a real fast and easy way to get the potatoes planted, and that the potatoes with their roots could navigate towards the soil on either side of the wood chips, and the wood chips would help them stay moist and also provide nutrients. You will see later in this video that this planting technique was a success, at least from my perspective, and might be something that I do again. So now we'll start seeing some progress footage. As you can see, there are bits of grass shooting up in the beds alongside of the intentionally planted seeds. But the grass was definitely outcompeted by the seeds that I planted in the long run, which is what I was hoping for. So both of these garden beds were unirrigated beds. They only received water from the rain. So the success of these garden beds, I think, is due to the quality of the compost, having the wood chips in the trenches to keep moisture nearby, and as well being grown directly from seed. Direct seeded garden beds are much more well adapted to the cycles of rain and can be thriving in unirrigated environments, as you can see. As well, planting the seeds dense allows the plants to shade the soil, which also helps retain moisture. So the main plants grown in this garden bed were arugula, lettuces, kale, mustards, and peas, as well as the onions. There were also a few broccoli and a few sunflowers, among other things, mixed in. I think my favorite plant was the arugula. It was the first to go to seed and did very well in the garden space, and of course tastes amazing. So these next images are sort of another little time lapse to see a quicker progression of the garden beds and how they grew. This progression is roughly from the beginning of March to the end of May. And here's some final footage of the garden bed. This is towards the end of May. And you can see lots of things are flowering. The onions, arugula, and mustard are all flowering and going to seed. And there's still plenty to eat and plenty to harvest. Jordan and I were eating as much as we could, and we still couldn't even make a dent in the garden. But that's okay, because we'll have plenty of seed for next season.
Yummy.
That's all for this video, but feel free to subscribe and stay tuned for more updates as I learn and grow my little urban paradise. Peace.